What's going on, guys? Welcome to You Suck at Coding. In this video, we'll be learning how to add multilingual support to our React applications using the i18next framework. For the beginners out there, I'll be setting up the React project from scratch and creating all of the UI. So if you're not a beginner and you're simply looking to get to the crux of the project, which is the translations, you can skip ahead to the timestamp mentioned on the screen right now. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so I'm at the terminal and at the directory where I want to create the new React app. And for that, I'll be using a command npx create React app and add the name of the project to it. So in this case, I'll be naming it multilingual. Feel free to name it whatever you want. Press enter. So this is going to go ahead and do all of the heavy lifting for us and create a nice clean version of a template React app. So get back once that is done. I'm going to move inside of the directory of the newly created project and open up a new VS Code window using the command code space period. Let's make this full screen. So as a first step, I will be cleaning up the project a bit to my preference. So I'll rename the .js component JSX, get rid of everything inside of it, start fresh, add an H1. It says let's build a multilingual app. Alright, let's get rid of the test.js file. Get rid of the logo, don't need that. Let's get rid of the app.css file, and inside of the index.css simply delete everything. Okay, let's fire up the terminal, do an npm start. Okay, let's see. Alright, it says let's build a multilingual app. Perfect. So in order to create the workflow between the pages in the navigation, we'll be needing a library, React Router DOM. So I'll be installing that first. npm I React Router DOM. So this is going to automatically install the latest version, which is the version 6 that has some changes as compared to the code that we've written in the previous tutorials. So I'll be pointing out the differences while I set it up. Alright, so once that is done, inside of the app.jsx, at the very top, I'll do an import browser router as router. You can leave it as router as well. That's just my preference that I import it as router. We'll import the route like we always do, and a new import that we'll be needing is a routes tag. And this is essentially going to include all of the routes, individual routes that we'll be adding. Right? Let's add a comment for the components. And as a first step, let's go ahead and create the pages that we need. So I'll create a folder pages inside of source and create two files, home and page and profile, my bad. Okay, let's go ahead and add an H1 in each of them so that we can differentiate them once they're added. H1 home. Similarly for profile. Profile. Some will also be needing a header, and for that I'll go inside of source and create another folder. Let's call it components. Inside of components, let's create another one, call it nav for navigation, and inside of nav let's create a header component. As of now, let's go ahead and give this an h1 too, calling it a header. Right, let's import all of these inside of the app.jsx. So let's start with the header. Move on to home and profile. Okay, so let's get rid of this div and add the variant tag, which is going to be a router tag. And inside of router for version 6, we'll add routes, which is going to enclose all of the individual route tags. So that's one thing that is different. The next thing is different is a prop. So as we always do, we'll add exact and path, which is the URL endpoint. For home, it's going to be / and instead of the component with just the name of the component, what's different for version 6 is basically the prop is named element, and inside of the curly brackets we'll have to add a self-closing component. Perfect. So that's home. Let's go ahead and add profile with a / profile, and also we want header for the entire app, so we'll define that or add that outside of the routes tag. Let's do a header, and this should be self-closing tag too. Perfect. So we have the header in the home, and if I go to / profile, we have the header in the profile. All right, so the next step would be to build the header, and for that we'll be installing the Bootstrap version 4.6 first. We'll make this full screen. Go to Bootstrap 4.6, documentation, copy the CSS, paste it inside of the public index.html. Right above it says title. So that's the Bootstrap CSS. Now we can add all of the class names, and for the JavaScript part that we need for the header, let's copy that and add it right after the body tag. Okay, so we have Bootstrap installed. You can close the tab, go to the header component and get started with that. As a first step, I'll do an import that I'll be needing, which is link from React Router DOM. Perfect. And we'll start by getting rid of this and adding a nav tag. For this nav tag, I'll add the classes navbar and then navbar expand large, navbar dark, which is for the dark theme that we'll be building, and a background of dark. Awesome. Inside of this, add a link tag, which will say use architect coding, name of the company, or it can be the logo too. Okay, we need to add a path, otherwise it gives us an error. This is going to be just a /. That should get rid of this. No, sorry, it's not path, it's actually 2. Perfect. And to this will also be adding class name, which is navbar -brand. Perfect. At the bottom of this, we'll be adding a button, and this is something I've straight taken out of the Bootstrap documentation. There we go. So this is for the times when the screen size is smaller than a particular breakpoint. So if this is full screen, it goes away. And for smaller screens, we have this hamburger, which does not work right now. All right, so you can pause the screen and copy and paste this, type it down if you want. As a next step, I'll be creating another div. This is what is going to address the paths for the collapsing. So I'll add a class name navbar -collapse. Before this, I'll also be adding class name collapse. Also to this, add ID, let's call it navbar nav camel case. Okay, so inside of this div, let's create an unordered list. Give this class name of navbar nav -nav, and also margin left auto, so that all of the options that we add go towards the right once the screen is full. All right, so this will add individual list items. So the first one is going to be just the profile that takes us to the profile page. Let's actually go to the home page. Okay, so inside of this list tag, I'll give this a class name first. It's going to be a nav item. Let's also give this a padding left 1, margin left of 1. That's fine. Let's just change this to a margin left of 2. All right, inside of this, we'll add a link tag again. Give this class name. First, let's add the 2 / profile to get rid of the error. And inside of the class name, let's give this a nav link. This should say profile. Let's see if we have it. All right. So there's something wrong with the class names, and I think, yeah, I misspelled the class name. Add an S. This should go white. Okay, so we have a profile that takes us to profile. Let's test this. Perfect, it's working. The next one is going to be to add the select option for the languages. For that, let's go ahead and create another list item. Give this class name of nav item, and inside of this I'll be adding select tag, and with this select tag, let's get rid of the name and the ID. Be adding the options. Option, the first one is going to be for English. Let's say English. Next option be for French, and this is how we're going to add this in French. Makes sense to have the language in the language that it is. And for Spanish, let's add this. So you can go ahead and create it for as many languages as you want. I'll just be doing this for English, French, and Spanish. Okay, so you see that there's something wrong with the styling. We don't want this styling. We want this to match the profile, and for that we'll be adding some classes. Let's go to the select tag, add some class names. First, this should be a nav link. Okay, let's do a background of dark. Let's do border 0 to get rid of that border. Also add margin left of 1. Okay, let's make this full screen. Okay, so I think it needs some margin from the top, and also I would like this to be before the profile. So let's do that. Copy this, paste it above the profile, and also give this margin right 2, margin top 1. See how that looks. I think it was better before. Let's get rid of the margin top. It's fine. Okay, let's make this full screen. So we have the UI for the header. This takes us to profile, this takes us to home, and this is where we can switch the languages. Alright, so as a next step, we'll add some things to the profile page. Let's go to the profile, and inside of there, let's add some class names to the parent div. Let's go container, margin top 5. Let's make this column fit 9, and if it's a medium or higher, let's give it a column 6. Okay, let's go to profile first, see the changes in action. For the H1, let's give this a class name text center. Okay, let's create a div, the class form group, add a label, This is going to be name. This, add an input tag, type text, class name of form control, and placeholder will just add John Doe as it was in the demo. Okay, so similarly, let's create two more. This one is going to be age, number, placeholder, so place it 25. The last one, if I'm not wrong, was email, and this could be john@john.com. Okay, see, this is how we wanted it to be. Perfect. So that is all of the inputs, and to this, as the last thing, we'll be adding a button. Add a break tag, create another div, the class name of text center. So we want the button to be in the center. Add a button tag that says submit, and to this add class name button dark. Okay, this works. We have the profile page set up, and that is it for building the UI. So the first step for adding multilingual support to the app would be to install the library React i18next. Let me quickly go to the documentation and show you what that is. React i18next. It's basically the React version of the package library i18next, which is sort of an industry standard for adding internationalization. So it has an excellent documentation. If there's anything that you do not clearly understand in this tutorial, or you want to take it up a notch, add some more translations, more features to what I'll show today, feel free to browse through the documentation and do that. Alright, so let's get started by installing the packages that we want. So I'll do an npm I. The first one is i18next. Second one is i18next -browser -language detector. The next one is i18next -http -backend. And the last one is React i18next. So let's go ahead and press enter, and that should install all of these packages inside of our package.json. So now that is done, we can go ahead and create a file at the source level. Let's call this file i18n, n as in the short form for next.js, and this is where we'll be setting it up. Okay, so inside of this file, we'll first be doing some imports. So I'll be importing i18n from the package i18next itself. The next one would be to import the backend from i18next -http -backend. This is basically what allows us to fetch the translations from where we'll be storing it. The next one is the language detector, which automatically detects the language of a browser. Import language detector from, so this one is going to be from i18next -browser -language detector. Awesome. And the last one is to initialize this in React. So that's init React I18next from React -i18next. So these are all of the imports that we'll be using. So let's get started. I'll use the top one that says i18n and use a .use method, to which I'll be passing the backend. The next one, I'll chain a .use to it and pass to it the language detector. And then another .use, pass to this the init React i18next, and then do a .init for initialize, do brackets, add an object to it, and inside of this object, I'll pass some fields. The first one being backend, and this backend is basically, let's add a comment, clarify that. So wait 1 second. This is going to be the translation file path. So let's do, inside of the backend object, let's do a load path, and how we're saving this is inside of the assets in public. So I'll do /assets /i18n. So this is a directory that we're yet to create, but I'm just going ahead and setting it up first. Do another one. Let's call this, let's do double curly brackets and add ns for namespace. So there'll be a different directory for each of the feature or the page, and that's why I've added this namespace. You can go ahead and create a single language file if the scope of your project is low, but just to set things up in a production way, I'm trying to create it as nice and clean as I can. So I'll be creating a namespace. Let's do another slash, and that is where the language file will go. So I'll do an lng inside of these two curly brackets .json, just because all of the language files are going to have a .json extension. Perfect. So we have the backend. The next key is going to be fallback lng, which is the fallback language. So if any of the languages are not chosen, there's some issue, we do fallback for the English language by default. Okay, so we have another one that is debug, which you can set to true for now. So debug is what allows you to look at all the languages and everything that's happening in the console for the browser while you're working towards the app. But this is something that should be disabled in production. I will set this to false because I won't necessarily be doing that, so it doesn't make any difference for me. And now we'll add the namespace. So as a namespace, it can just be a single one, which could be i18n for you, but since we're, like I said before, we'll be defining multiple directories / namespaces for this one. So we'll be defining 3, and all of them would go in this array as strings. The first one is going to be common. So let's say this is something where you can keep all of the common translations that apply to the entire app. This could be a submit button, a cancel button, something like that. Let's do one for the home page. So even though our home page simply says home, once you build upon it, it obviously will have more translations. So you can create one namespace for home. And finally, we'll create another one for profile. Okay. Just as a comment, I can add, you can have multiple namespaces in case you want to divide a huge translation into smaller pieces and load them on demand. Perfect. So the next key is going to be interpolation, and to this we'll pass 2 more fields. It will be escape value, and this is set to false. The next one is format separator, and this one is equal to a comma. All right, so we have the interpolation. Let's see what we have left. The last one is react, and to this we pass weight true. And for this entire file, we'll do an export default i18n. All right, so we have this file set up. As a next step, what I'm going to do is go inside of the app.jsx file and add this. So I'll go to app.jsx. At the very top where it says import React from React, I'm just going to add, you can actually get rid of the React, and let's say import suspense from it. So this suspense tag is something that I can add on top, and this can be the parent tag for the rest of the tags, including the router. So let's do a suspense and go ahead and copy, cut and paste everything inside, and to the suspense we add a prop, which is fallback, which is basically if the translations are not loaded for a certain reason, you can add like a loading string to it, something like that. I will just be adding null for now, but that's basically how it works. Okay, so we have the suspense fallback added. The last step, what we'll do is go inside of the index.js, and over there let's just import the file that we've created, which is i18n, and that's fine. Okay, so now that we've defined the namespaces and set it up inside of the app, what we can do is go ahead and create the translation files before we import these translations and replace them with the actual text inside of all of the pages. So for that, I'll be creating a folder inside of the public. Let's call this assets. So this is usually where all of the images and other assets go. So inside of assets, let's do an i18n. And inside of the i18n is where we'll add those namespaces as folders. So there was one that was common, there was another one that was for home, and the last one was for profile. Okay, so because we have 3 languages, we'll need to create 3 files in each of them. There'll be one for English, another one for Spanish, and another one for French. So it's EN for English, ES for Spanish, and FR for French, which is the language code. So I'll do the same for the rest. Alright, so let's start with the common one. So I'll go to the English, and inside of the common, what I'm going to be adding is simply submit. So there's a submit button, even though it's just being used in the profile. I assume that it will be used more than once in an app, so I'll just add it to the common. So if the label, if the keyword is submit, I want the value in English to be submit. For the label, it's being used in the header, but I'm assuming the name of the company or the label gets used at other places. So let's say for you suck at coding, this is the translation coding that I've added. Let's go with profile. So profile is something that's added in the header for navigation, and it's also a label for the profile page. So I keep it inside of the common and use it in these 2 places. All right, so we have the English file for common. Let's go ahead and create the English file for home. So this is simply going to be home, and the translation is home. Okay, so we have that. So let's go ahead and add some translations to the profile now. So the profile is going to have a name field. This translates to name. There's an age for age, and then finally an email for email. All right, so now we can go ahead and add translations for the other languages too. For the purposes of this tutorial, I have simply gone ahead and fetched these translations from the Google Translate, and you don't want that for your application. That defeats the whole purpose of adding the translations manually this way. So I wouldn't recommend you to do that. You should obviously have a translator who converts all of the specific labels to the desired language and their meaning. So for this one, we'll be doing simply from Google Translate. I've already gone ahead and grabbed all of the translations. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'll simply be copying and pasting the required translations. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the home page. So inside the home page, the first step is going to be to import the use translation hook. So we import this hook, and inside of the component, do a const, we destructure the field T from the use translation, and to this use translation hook we pass via an array the namespace that we're looking for. So for the home page, it's simply the home. If there were multiple namespaces, you would add these to the array, something like this. But for this one, we just need the one. Okay, so we destructure the variable or the constant T from use translation. Let's go ahead and add some styling to it so that it's at the center. I think I forgot to do that during building the UI. That's fine. And with this, I'll simply be passing text center translate. Yeah, that looks more like it. So in order to create the translations, I'll just be getting rid of this, add curly brackets. To this, I'll add a T, the one that's at the top, and then go ahead and create brackets. Inside of brackets, I can simply pass the label that I'm looking for. So inside of this home English or Spanish or French.json, the label that I'm looking for is defined as home. And that is going to replace this with the actual translation for the language that I've selected. As a next step, I'll go ahead and add these translations to the header and also add the handler so that a translation is changed upon selecting a different language. So let's go to the header and see what we need at the very top. As a first step, I'll do some imports that I'll be needing. The first one is going to be a use effect hook we use from React. Similar to the previous one, we'll import the use translation hook from React i18next, and also we'll be importing the i18next from i18next. Alright, so the next step would be inside of the component, destructure and get these constants. There's i18n and t like last time, which is equivalent to the use translation hook, to which we pass the namespace, which is common for this one. So it makes use of the common namespace and doesn't necessarily has a new one for the header. Okay, so as a first step, what I want to do is add this use effect hook. Let me add the correct syntax for it. Pass this an empty dependency array. So what this use effect is going to do is look for the language from the local storage. So we do a local storage dot get item, and this item is going to be i18next lng, and it looks for the length of the language that it has. If the length of the language is anything greater than 2, what it will be doing is setting the language. So we'll do an i18next dot change language to English. So as you know, we're using the language codes which are of size 2, so en, fr and es. So by default, if it's an incognito window in Chrome or any of the other browsers, it does lead to some issues with the language. So what we're essentially doing is, as soon as the component loads, we're checking if there's the length anything greater than 2, which means it could be eng or it could be the full keyword English, and similarly for the other languages. And what we're doing is essentially reverting back to the 2 keywords which for English, which is en. Okay, so that's the use effect. The next thing would be to add the translations. So let's get rid of this, add a t. So since again we're using a single namespace, I can directly look for the labels. This one was you, second coding, all lowercase. This should be camel case too, but prefer to have it lowercase, that's fine. And also the profile. This would be T and simply profile over here. And in order to test this and actually for the language to change, we'll be creating a handler. Let's add it after the use effect. Let's call this handle language change. It's an event, and what it's essentially doing is using the i18n and do the same change language, if I can get the spellings right, and set it to whatever the target value is. So e.target.value, and that would be the language. This handler is essentially going to be passed to the select as one of the props. So this would be an on change, and the on change get the handle language change. With regards to the value, we have not necessarily created a state for the language because we can directly communicate with the local storage. The value could be local storage dot get item, and it's going to be i18next lng. So make sure you get the keyword right, whatever is capitalized and what is not, and this should do the trick. So let's go ahead and test this. So I'm at the home page, change this to French. It's changed to French, even the label and the profile. Spanish, it's changed to Spanish. Spanish, again Spanish. Alright, so we have it set up. For the header in the home, the next step would be to go to profile and add the translations. Okay, let's open up the profile page. And for this one too, we'll be importing the use translation hook from React i18next. Again, restructure and get the translation T. And what's going to be different for this one is that it'll use two namespaces. So we want the profile label from common, and we want the name, email, and age from the profile namespace. We also want the submit buttons translation from the common too. So it's basically being used for two purposes over here. In an actual app, it would have more fields. So for this one, when we have multiple namespaces, let's see how this is done. So I have the curly brackets T, and instead of writing just profile for the profile label, what I'll be doing is adding the namespace first. So the common, add a colon that goes to the namespace and looks for this label. So it's being loaded on demand. So that is how you deal with multiple namespaces. Similarly, I'll be creating this for the name and email and age. So T, this one's from profile, and from profile looking for name. Look at the name, just copy and paste this, and then change it after. Okay, so this is going to be age, it's going to be email, and finally we have the submit, which is from common. The label we're looking for is submit. Okay, let's go ahead and make this full screen and see this in action. So we have the profile page opened. As soon as I change the language to French, everything gets changed to French, including the submit button, the labels, and similarly for Spanish. And that is how you add multilingual support to your React app. Alright everyone, so this concludes the tutorial on how to add internationalization or localization or multilingual support to your React app. If you enjoyed watching the video and learned something new from it, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. This is Banish at You Suck at Coding. Until next time.